Hello, this is GCSE Organisation with Mrs Castanera, and this is Lesson 11, Transpiration. So, today our keywords are potometer, light intensity, temperature, airflow, humidity and rate. By the end of the lesson we should know what all of these mean and be able to explain them. So, I'd like to start by doing the knowledge check, please. There are 8 questions. Pause the video whilst you have a go at those questions. Okay, let's go through those. So, identify 2 plant organs. Well, there is the root, stem, leaf or flower as well. So any 2 of those will get you the mark. Make sure that you add on the items you haven't got. Even if you've written 2 and you've got the mark, please do add the other 2 organs as well. Thank you. Question 2. State the function of the meristem tissue. Well, it allows the plant to grow. Question 3. State in which tissue photosynthesis takes place. That would be the palisade mesophyll. Question 4. Identify the function of the stoma. They control gas exchange and water loss. Question 5. Define translocation. It's the process of moving substances such as sugars or amino acids around an organism, in this case a plant. Question 6. Define transpiration. It's the process of transporting water through a plant from roots to leaves, and it evaporates away and diffuses in the leaves. So you don't need to have that last part about where it evaporates and diffuses. I tell you to get the mark, but I would like you to have it written down anyway so that you understand that that is why the water is pulled through the plant. Question 7. State what the function is of the cell membrane. Well, it controls what enters and exits the cell. Question 8. State the definition of a non-communicable disease. Well, that is a disease that cannot be passed on to others in any way. So it's not contagious. Give yourself a mark out of 8 for that, please. Okay, and then we're going to move on. So today's overview, we will be able to, by the end of this lesson, understand that environmental factors can affect the rate of transpiration. Now, we've already touched on this from last lesson. We're going to do much more on this today. And we're going to determine how factors affect transpiration rate by collecting and assessing data. Well, unfortunately, we can't do by collecting and assessing data, okay, because we are not in a lab. This is online, so we won't be able to do that aspect of it today. Transpiration. Transpiration is a major mechanism, and it's the major mechanism that drives the movement of water through a plant. So transpiration is the reason water moves through a plant. Water enters a plant through the root hairs, and it passes through the tissues of the root into the xylem. It travels up through the xylem vessels into the leaves. Transpiration, the evaporation of water from the leaves, is a major factor that pulls water up through the plant. So the water is pulled up through the plant because of the evaporation of water from the leaves. When the water enters the roots, hydrogen bonds link each water molecule to the next. So the molecules of water are pulled up in the thin xylem vessel like beads up on a string. The molecules of water are pulled up like beads on a string. Okay, because they're all bonded to the one next to them. So they're all attached. So the water moves up the plant, it enters the leaves, moves into the air spaces in the leaf, and then evaporates, or transpiration, or transpires, through the stomata. That's the plural, and the singular of that is stoma. So this whole phrase here, and I'm going to grab a different highlighter colour, because this is like a really key phrase. This phrase is basically the definition of transpiration. So highlighted in yellow here is essentially a definition of transpiration, or it's an explanation of what it is. Okay, so it's the water moving up the plant, entering the leaves, moving into air spaces, and evaporating through the stomata. That's like the second half of the explanation of what transpiration is. Okay, So if you go to this link here, you'll get to an online lab bench activity, which is really useful. Now there's quite a bit to it. It'll take you about 15-20 minutes or so to go through, possibly longer depending on how difficult you find it. But it's really, really important, and it'll run you through this practical that we're not able to do today. Okay, so it explains all the key concepts. You need to click through to the next activity, and there's quiz questions as you go through, which you need to have a go at answering, and you can check your answers to see if you're right. And then it finishes with a downloadable lab exercise, a lab quiz, which I strongly recommend you have a go at. Okay, and all the answers are provided for you. Okay, so if you pause the video whilst you do that, and then come back once you've finished. Okay, so we're going to move on. There are hundreds of stomata, which is the plural of stoma, in the epidermis of a leaf. Okay, so there's a lot of them. Most are located in the lower epidermis, but there are a few in the upper epidermis. They reduce water loss, okay, and because they're on the lower surface, that's why they reduce water loss, because the lower surface receives less solar radiation than the upper surface. Okay, so if the holes are on the top, all the water would evaporate out the plant through these holes, okay, through these stomata. So they reduce water loss because the lower surface of the leaf receives less solar radiation, so less heat, than the upper surface. Each stoma allows the carbon dioxide, which is needed for photosynthesis, to enter. And the water evaporates through them as well via transpiration. So there are 4 factors affecting transpiration. And these 4 main factors are light intensity, to start with, temperature, humidity, and airflow. Now, for light intensity, essentially the brighter the light, the greater the transpiration rate. So stomata are only open when it's light, so they're only open in the daytime. When it gets dark, no transpiration can occur, as the stomata are closed. Temperature. So the warmer or hotter it is, the faster transpiration occurs. So high temperature increases transpiration rate. And that's because the water particles have more energy to evaporate and diffuse through the stomata. Humidity. So the drier the air around the leaf, the faster the transpiration rate. So high humidity means there's a lot of water in the atmosphere. Low humidity means that it's very dry air. So low humidity is a faster transpiration rate. So when the air is humid, it contains lots of water. Okay, so there's very little difference between the inside of the leaf, which contains a lot of water, and the outside of the leaf, where there's also a lot of water because it's humid. However, so we talk about this being no concentration gradient, similar conditions inside and out. However, when it is less humid, this is not correct. When it is less humid, there is a concentration gradient. So less humid is drier. So when it is drier or less humid, if the phrase humid is confusing you, feel free to use the phrase drier instead. Okay, so when it is drier, there is a concentration gradient. Okay, so this time, because it's so dry outside, the water is moving from the area of high concentration inside the leaf to the low concentration of dry air outside the leaf. And lastly, airflow. The better the flow of air, the greater the transpiration rate. So airflow is about wind, essentially. So the better the flow of air, so the windier it is, the greater the transpiration rate. If airflow is poor, so typically inside a building, then water won't evaporate and it will concentrate on and around the leaf so it won't diffuse away. However, when there is good airflow, water vapour is constantly moving away from the leaf So diffusion forms a high to low concentration gradient, and that's how it occurs. So when there's good airflow, water vapour is constantly moving, so diffusion from a high to low concentration gradient will occur. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go to student notes page, because I think this can be summarised in a much nicer diagram. Okay, so student notes page, page 50. And we are going to, should have done that with a ruler, but we are going to factors affecting transpiration. So I'm going to do an up arrow to show increased transpiration. I'm going to write increased as well, so we're clear. And then an arrow to go downwards showing decreased or less transpiration. Okay, so this time using a ruler because that was terribly messy. Light intensity. So, increased light intensity or decreased light. Okay, so daytime and nighttime. The next one is going to be temperature. Okay, so for increased transpiration, I'm going to zoom this out, we're going to want a high temperature. So when it's hot. And for less transpiration, we're going to have a lower temperature. So when it's cool or cold. Our third factor, dearie me, need a longer ruler here. For increased transpiration, we've got humidity. So we want low humidity. So dry air, so dry weather. For less transpiration, we want increased humidity. Okay, and we call that humid weather. So I'm going to write wet, humid weather or conditions. And lastly, this time using a decent sized ruler, we're going to have airflow. So increased airflow, windy for increased transpiration. And for decreased transpiration, we're going to have less airflow. So less airflow, not windy. So we could say that for increased transpiration, we're going to want a hot, dry, windy day. For decreased transpiration, we're going to want a cold, humid, wet, not windy night. And we can write that. So a hot, dry, windy, and let's say sunny, so that we've got lots of light, day. That is what's going to give us lots of transpiration. For less transpiration, now this increased transpiration, we've basically just described desert conditions, and you'll find that plants in the desert are very dry, okay, and they really struggle to retain their heat. They have to adapt to that environment. For less transpiration, so plants that get to keep their water, we want a cold, wet or humid, not windy, cloudy day or night. Okay, so as you can see, If you live somewhere where it's cold, wet, humid, not very windy, quite cloudy in the day, has short days, you're going to have lots of wet environments. Okay, you're going to have a lot of green, lush vegetation, so typically forested areas and that. So we live in a country where this is quite often the weather conditions, so we have a lot of woodland and forested areas, and there's lots of places in the world where this exists. We get mosses as well because of that. So now we know how to get what conditions will give us increased transpiration and what will give us decreased transpiration. We've summarised it here, and we have written a short, brief verbal summary there, or written summary. So we're going to move on now. So unfortunately, we're not able to do this practical activity, and the two videos here, the simulated assessments, these simulated practicals, they don't work, unfortunately. So, but we know the conditions, so we're going to move on from that. However, you can watch at the bottom of page 45 this summary, and I recommend you watch this summary, okay, and on YouTube. So pause the video whilst you do that, please. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to complete the knowledge and application check. Okay, that's on page 49. There are 11 questions, so pause the video whilst you have a go at those questions, please. Okay, let's go through those questions. Question 1, define transpiration. So it's the process of transporting water through a plant from the roots to the leaves where it evaporates and diffuses away. If you haven't got any of that, or if you've missed some of that out, please make sure you add that to your answer. And make sure you're using a different coloured pen to mark. Question 2, identify the 4 factors that affect transpiration: light intensity, temperature, airflow, and humidity. You need all 4 for the mark. Question 3, state what tissue transpiration occurs in. That would be the xylem. Question 4, identify the physical process by which water molecules move into the root hair cells. That would be osmosis. Question 5, state the process by which water moves out of the leaf. That would be diffusion or evaporation. Question 6, identify the leaf structure that water exits through. So the stomata, that's the plural, or the stoma, which is singular. So that means one stoma, several stomata. Question 7, name the chemical process which plants gain energy during the day. So how do plants gain energy during the day? Well, during photosynthesis. Okay, question 8, this question literally didn't make sense. State what type of cell a plant is. Nope, didn't make sense, so ignore this question. Question 9. Suggest what the impact on transpiration rate will be on plants living in high humidity. So we discussed this. Increased transpiration due to a higher concentration gradient. So that's not really much of an answer, actually. So they're gonna have increased transpiration. So if you said they're gonna have lots more transpiration, that's definitely worth a mark. For a second mark here, I think we need to talk about the fact that the plants are going to be dry. They're going to lose a lot of water. And they're going to need to adapt to their environment. Okay, such as desert plants. So anything along these lines, in fact, the plants can be very dry. They're going to lose water. They're going to struggle to keep their water, or they're going to have to adapt to their environment. So there's 2 marks available here. One to say there's more transpiration, and one to say what they're going to need to do because of that. Question 10. Describe the process by which water molecules move through the xylem. Okay, so there's loads of ways of answering this question, okay, because there's a lot to say. First of all, the first mark is for saying that water is pulled into and up the plant by the evaporation of water from the leaves. You may also say that water moves into the roots by osmosis. Okay, I'm going to write that at the bottom because actually that's worth a mark. Okay, so water moves into the roots by osmosis, that's worth a mark. Water is pulled up the plant by the evaporation of water from the leaves, also known as transpiration. And lastly, that all the water is joined together by hydrogen bonding, which is why the evaporation of water from the leaves actually pulls the water up. Okay, so there's 3 marks here. Okay. So let's see how many we're out of. Oh no, there's one more question. Sorry about that. Question 11. Okay. Explain how the root hair cell is adapted to take in water efficiently. Well, it has a high surface area. Okay. So after those questions, we've had actually 10 questions because we skipped question 8. So that's out of 13. So if you give yourself a mark out of 13, if you've got 7 or more, then you're doing really well. Okay, well done. If you've got 5 or less, then really you need to review this lesson because you need to learn a lot more of this. Okay, make sure you've reviewed the transpiration information. Okay, so that is the end of our lesson. If you have any questions, feel free to email your teacher. Thank you.